I'm Cherie OSullivan from UniSQ. Our project was a pilot study for customisation of a water quality model in an ungauged catchment for Din, and I was project coordinator. Our project set out to trial a new approach to modelling in an ungauged area and bring the community along from the very beginning to help build trust in this new approach. So our project produced a community workshop where all the interested parties in water quality in Tanana catchment got together and shared and documented their knowledge on the catchment and how that could inform the way we did this new modelling approach. I'm most proud of how proud Steve Burgess is of how the workshop went and the asset that was created in terms of community knowledge on the catchment that can be used for this and other projects.
So look, I'd like to welcome Cherie OSullivan to the floor. Cherie's representing USQ, Mary River Catchment Coordinating Committee and DES with a project on trialling customisation of a water quality model in an ungauged catchment for Din. You can almost say that in one breath. There we go.
I'll try and make that flow. Wasn't initially intended to, but as you'll see at the end, it does. So like Brian said, our project was to customise the water quality models for Din. Carrying on from what Kate was saying, our project was aiming to meet the RDI requirement for building community trust in the models. So we proposed that, I should take a step back. We'll go to the next slide. We've coupled with Steve Burgess up the back there, fantastic water modeller from MICCC, Banty and Afshan now from DES as well. I'd like to acknowledge countries, the traditional owners of the country, custodians of the land as well, Spatula and Kabi people up in the catchment that we're working in, and particularly for the knowledge that's passed down from the past to the present to help with decisions. So the aims of our project, like I was saying, was to build the community awareness of models and how they happen, how they work. Like I touched on before, MICCC they're well known for the water quality monitoring that they do. It's quite substantial. They use a water watch program that's used elsewhere in New South Wales. And we hope to use that to fill some data gaps. As a bit of background, my research previously was looking at, with the models, water quality models, they use data to calibrate and verify them, but there's nearly 30% of the area that flows to the barrier reef has no data. So there's a lot of challenges around how do you verify the model in that area. And the method they use is just they borrow data from the neighbouring catchment, but landowners are quite sceptical of that because they know that their landscape is quite different from the neighbouring landscape. So that's what's affected the trust. So that's why we wanted to work with the community, see where they're interested in and use the data they have in an ungauged catchment to verify the model. We also wanted to engage First Nations. As you'll see later on in the presentation, previous research has found looking at the landscape and the original vegetation can give us an idea of what's going on with the patterns in water quality. So that can overcome that criticism of models that the catchments might not be similar. And then evaluate the model. So we started off doing a workshop, all going to plan. It was great. We have Banty, who's the modeller in DES. He came and explained how the water monitoring data is used to validate the models. So the interested community members, you can see there, these are the MICCC crew who do the monitoring and they can see how it's used. They collect their data for other purposes. And a lot of the time people look at data that's collected and compare it against the model without really understanding the nuts and bolts. So Banty presented that. And we also wanted to get a better understanding of the landscape to then feed back into the model. So Steve, thank you so much. He chaired the Walking the Landscape process to take us around and look at what the catchment looked like. So this was the outcome of our first workshop. What we did, we looked at the geology, and the community spoke about areas, different things that were of interest to them in terms of water quality or the environment. And you can see there was a lot of focus around, these are all the points that they wanted to capture. And then this is a resource MRCCC can use for other purposes as well. When I spoke before about my previous research, it was looking at water quality patterns in gauged catchments, so where we have data. And actually looking at which catchments have the same patterns of water quality. And then also separately looking at which catchments have the same patterns of original vegetation as an indicator of what could be driving those patterns. And the reason we looked at that is not because the vegetation drives water quality, but it's a response to the whole combination of the geology, the climate, the aspect, everything that's usually included in models is already given to us in one parsimonious data set. And what the so what our research found was catchments that had similar distributions of open forests had the same water quality patterns during the dry season only, and the rest of the time it was all over the shop. Catchments that had the same patterns during the wet season and increasing flows, they also were characterised by open woodland vegetation. And so the dry season, the pattern wasn't consistent. And then catchments that were dominated in vine forest, they had the same water quality patterns anytime. So we started seeing that catchments operate a bit differently. So this map, this is Tanana catchment. This is the ungauged part of the Mary that we focused this project on. And what we did, we got the original vegetation mapping and then grouped it into these 4 vegetation types that indicate the water quality patterns. And like you can see, that area that the community was all focused on is around here, where we've got a mixture of the dry season and, the woodland and the open forest, which had the opposite water quality patterns. What I didn't say, I'll go back here. So what the community talked about in this dense area was that the water flows were quite flashy and there's lots of little dams and billabongs. It's quite unique. So yeah, that was interesting to see that that was also unique when we looked at the vegetation. Part of this project also was to look at the current model. When I said they use data from neighbouring catchments, currently they use data from Mary. Initially, we used AI to see which of the gauged catchments of the barrier reef had the most similar vegetation patterns to Tanana, which is our catchment. And O'Connell came up. Oh, we also looked at land use as well. But then after the project had started, we've been doing separate research as well and looking into what they call explainable AI. So looking at what's driving the results. And when we drilled down, it actually turned out the Mary catchment is quite similar to Tanana anyway. So maybe it wasn't the best catchment to be looking into this theory on, but we're still working on that, and that will be coming out in October. One of the biggest learnings from this project, and this is what flows on from Kate's project, is so we had our fantastic first workshop. Everyone who was at the interim showcase would have seen we followed the advice of engaging or employing GuruVision, who like local Indigenous businesses. So Luke took a fantastic video of the catchment. So in this workshop we had, we could see where we were looking at. Around that time as well, there was a big court case with neighbouring parties. So to go on with our second workshop, which was taking what we did with the walking the landscape, take it outside and actually look in the catchment to see what this landscape looks like. We want to include Kabi as well, because they're it's their country in part of Tanana catchment. And at this point, I think a big acknowledgement needs to go to Jenny for all you've done for championing First Nation involvement in this entire RDI program. Under the contract, we could have forged ahead, done the workshop, be fine. UniSQ is also doing a lot of work separately to get better involvement of First Nations knowledge in research and education. There's a lady called Odette Best who brings everyone together and educates us. She's the Vice Pro-Chancellor of First Nations Research. And through her conversations, it came to our attention that there's this code of ethics for any research that's done that uses Indigenous knowledge. And because we're looking at the original vegetation as part of this and what was here initially, that's why I stepped back, had a chat to Jenny, who supported waiting, making sure no one in the community feels they're left behind. So we're still trying to make contact with Kabi. We're nearly there. We've had some meetings lined up and then fallen through. And the reason for that is it's not necessarily money. We've included budget in this project for First Nations. It's time. So Kabi, they're dealing with a court case. They're at capacity. Like you guys were saying, nearly every project at the moment wants to include First Nations. And there's only so many people. Like, you can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have all the time in the world. So what this HS Code of Ethics says basically is before a project gets initiated, a written memorandum of understanding needs to be developed first before it's started. And that helps ensure First Nations is at the table and has the right capacity. So that was how I felt that carried on from Kate's. This is just some of our results. So we've done our preliminary modelling, changing parameters. I'm not going to go into it here because we will cover it in the final report. The other big learning that we had from this project was we thought we could use the water quality monitoring and just compare the model against it. As it turns out, there's quite a lot involved with making sure the data matches the model. So Banta did a great presentation at the workshop explaining how the how the samples need to be taken at different spots across the hydrograph. And then David Orr in DES as well has given this summary of what type of data we need to be able to then compare the water quality against the models, because without that, there's just too much variability. That graph I showed before was based on modelled data or extrapolated, not actual. So out of our project, our challenges that are still pending is we're awaiting the field trip and we're awaiting to refine the models to then provide the report to Jenny. And the big learnings were the ATS protocol I mentioned to everyone. So I strongly encourage everyone who's been saying to engage everyone at the table in the project initiation. I included budget, but I didn't think to talk to First Nations before the project started. Also, water samples, just because there's data doesn't mean it's appropriate for the model. So you need to look at that. And that was the other thing we found. So that was what was fantastic about the workshop. And I don't know, would you say it helped build trust in or community understanding? Yeah, please.
And sort of stays representative so they can see our things.
I'm not sure this is the modelling forum is the right place to say that. I don't really care much about the modelling that happened there. The workshop was one of the best things that we had done. Even though we had different modelers, we had scientists there, we had people. Even the fact that people have been doing scientific work on that small catchment, like we had the aquabam aquatic, assessments. We had the work that I'd been across with the water resource plan modelling, and we had the reef, modelling, and we had our water watch volunteer people. We had the forestry management people there. So we had a variety of science. One of the major, Luke was probably the major contributor at the whole thing. Luke Barraclough, a bachelor fellow, in terms of the overview of just the feel of the landscape and the catchment, which, as it turned out scientifically, is one of the very good predictors. So really, whether the model works or not, we got a huge amount out of that just by sharing information, even to the extent that finding that 2 state government models, both using source, like the one used for water resource planning and the one used for reef catchment models, were quite different in terms of the way they were handling physical water transfers between the Mary and the Tanana catchment via the Lower Mary irrigation scheme. Because people looked at it from different points of view, and we're still not convinced that the actual bulk transfer of water between those 2 catchments, which occurs via the irrigation scheme, is encapsulated in the reef model. So there's modelling outcomes that came out of it. This model might not be working very well for predicting DIN, but we got so much value out of that workshop. I reckon the whole project was worth it just for that workshop, just from my own point of view. That's all I wanted to say.
Cool. So that's a great finale to our presentation. That's I suppose, yeah, the best feedback you can get from the community group, something like that. Yeah, so that's the Panta array. Everything flows, and it looks like we've all just had to keep flowing with how the projects go. Yep. Thank you, Steve.